Charging so I can use it.
Good evening, members of the House, and welcome to the 10th Ordinary Meeting of the 175th session of the Literary and Scientific Society. Tonight's debate is "This House believes there is a viable alternative to democracy." This is our novice debating competition. Last week we held a pre-round, and these are all the debaters that got through, so everyone give them a round of applause. Now, this debate will be done a bit differently. There won't be a vote on speaker ability. Instead, our judging panel will pick a best speaker. So our judging panel consists of Ulcan McSparn, HLM, an Irish Times Debating Championship finalist with a Masters in Law, as well as the training officer of the 171, Ciara Swiel, HLM, the mother of the house, as well as an Irish Times semi-finalist, has a degree in English and French and training officer of the 173, and the illustrious Tom Burns, current Irish Times quarter-finalist, has a degree in law and is rumoured to be studying a Masters in English. Now, before we get into the order of business, I will move on to council announcements. So my first council announcement is that we all know and love Lavery's very much. However, it is very, very expensive. So we would like to move our new pub to the Post House, which is up the road, like opposite the bar, and we will be going there after debate. And it's like, if you use student discount, it's like £4 something for a pint of Guinness and stuff, so it's a lot cheaper. Are there any other council announcements?
Yeah, so for the keen-eyed ones amongst us, you may have seen that we published a post asking people to register their interest for the Christmas dinner. On the last week afterwards, the Society generally holds a Christmas dinner with numbers dependent. There's a form on the link on the Instagram bio where you can fill your name out and say if you'll come. The location and cost are to be confirmed because we sort of need to know a general idea of numbers first, but we're looking at venues pretty rapidly. So if you could maybe come, please fill out the form, and then once a place is booked and we have a cost, we'll then be in touch with you directly.
Are there any other council announcements? Great, I will invite James Orchin up to read the minutes.
Hello.
Hi, James. Hi, James.
Die? Please. Okay. On the 9th of November 2023, a mere 2 weeks ago, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 7th Ordinary Meeting of the 175th session to debate the motion, "This House," and I haven't filled in what the motion was, something about the environment, so I probably was bored.
Oh yeah, this house.
Yeah, some nonsense anyway. Anyways, as usual, the meeting began with announcement. Madam President announced an amendment that would restrict the consumption of the devil's broth. The motion passed 38 to 3-2. Mr. Daniel Toft raised the issue of our exciting trip to Dublin. If you were interested in going, I'm sorry, that was last week, and told people to be at the bus promptly. Mr. Fintan Lalor raised the success of our members in the Irish Times for once, and then Mr. Sam Hazlett asked to ratify the House's Charity of the Year, Bocomo. The motion passed unanimously. Following a reading of the minutes, the meeting moved to private members' business. Ryan Kilgore raised concerns that serious motions are becoming overrun by joke speeches. Fintan Lalor raised the King's Speech, mentioning the low quality of degrees. Hi, Tosha. Responses were heard from Grant Warren, Max Kieran, Ryan Kilgore, you, and Ciara Robertson. Responses were then heard. Sorry, Ciara Robertson raised something. I don't know what was raised, but apparently you were. Responses were heard. What?
Skeletons.
Oh, yes,
okay. Yeah, anyways, President's questions then took place. Fintan Lalor raised the issue of an American shooting some environmental protesters. The President hedged, apparently. Max Kieran asked what the President's favourite movie was, Wuthering Heights. Ciara Robertson asked the President's favourite video game, Skyrim. These are really, really bland, boring options. Ben Holmes asked the President's view on the Beatles' last song. She didn't like it. Remember when that was in the news? Yeah, no, whatever. Noah Barnley, who thankfully isn't here, asked about the GIMP, and this is where the Society's morality went downhill. Rory ran out of the room getting extremely excited. Beatty asked if we could have a casus belli for invading France. Yes, came the response from Madam President. And Jonathan Massey asked something with the Iraq War. After the President's question, the vote of prior opinion was heard. There were 14 votes for aye, 25 votes for nay, and people weren't listening, so the opposition had it. First in the proposition was Jack Steele. This is a stupid proposal, he intoned, maybe banging his hand on the lectern. He referenced claims that in the 60s we would run out of food, out of supplies in the 70s, there was global cooling in the 1980s. Net zero is the same, according to him. It would be financial suicide to do something completely unmanageable in the same way as the King's speech. It is not economically viable as well. Heat pumps are expensive and only 90,000 homes can get grants. Net zero would see the death of agriculture in this country, he argued, focusing on nuclear power. This is a recurring thing throughout the debate where the proposition can't decide if they like nuclear power or not. First in the opposition was Keir Robertson, 9.2 trillion. That's a big number. Greta will not do this. Apparently, don't know what she's not going to do. Net zero will make us money. Net zero is not a cost, but rather an investment, the building block for tomorrow. A lot of real vague platitudes here. He argued that net zero will be good. And then he invoked the New Deal and said stuff about infrastructure, and then argued that changing our vehicles to become more pedestrianised. Anyway, second in the proposition was Jonathan Massey. Quote, "What has the climate ever done for us?" End quote, he intoned. This was so outrageous, he argued, and argued it was deeply flawed, the environment. Companies use net zero to ignore real issues. Achieving net zero now is not achievable, now especially this is ill-defined. Reforestation doesn't work. Carbon capture doesn't work. He then mentioned pumps. 90% of carbon capture doesn't work, did you know that? He mentioned a carbon capture storage leak in California. Did you know that carbon capture doesn't work? Colonialism. Second on the opposition was James Murdoch. He began saying that he would focus on geopolitics and human rights. Regional instability is exacerbated by climate change, and then ISIS. Third speaker for the proposition was Ryan Kilgore. He began by speaking on behalf of the first three speakers of the proposition by saying that so-called climate change is real. In inverted commas, apparently. This is an example of government overreach, climate change apparently is. Economic blunders, joblessness, this is politically correct, politically acceptable social ostracism, pragmatism. He used buzzwords. Net zero is the same as a Ponzi scheme. And then he said amogus. And then he got really angry at Ulez. You're safe here. Quote, "You need to side with the proposition as they are lying to you," end quote, said the third speaker on the proposition. Rhetoric. If you support net zero, you will get bad things like democratically elected governments, end quote. Third speaker on the opposition was Michael Mackey. He listed off Chernobyl and Fukushima, though he said Hiroshima instead. Just a slightly different situation there. Nuclear energy is safe and good. He argued that net zero was vital for efficiency and effectiveness. And, I see the American is here.
Oh,
Why don't you go and throw some tea into Boston Bay? Anyways, nuclear waste of today can become nuclear fuel of tomorrow. The final speaker in the proposition was Luke Anthony Patrick Maguire. Yes. Quote, "I'm not going to stand here and give a fact-based argument," end quote. He claimed that liberals are not always wrong, which earned my ire. "Science is a liar sometimes," quote. "Bias exists in science. How can you trust it? It's a boogeyman used by advocates of climate change to scare young, impressionable children like Kira." Globalism.
The oldest people in this room.
Quote, "This shows how we detest you," end quote, he said to Keir, pointing at him. "The proposition are idealist. Ulez is a bad form of taxation. Vote for freedom," said the Mel Gibson Tribute Act there. The final speaker for the opposition was Grant Warren, HLM. Quote, "How can anyone follow up the Luke Maguire return tour?" Quote, "It's more likely to end up with global warming to be like Luke Maguire's farewell tour," end quote. I don't know what way that's been worded, but apparently that's what he said. He admitted that he does not believe what he is saying and admitted that he is a globalist. Shame. Boo. He argued that the prop are being too narrow in terms of definition of the cost. Too much of the discourse is framed around the point that apparently we have a lot of time to act. We do not. We do not have the luxury of not being impacted by it. What about the poor people who live in South Armagh? What does achieving net zero mean? Quote, "I live in the banks of Strangford Lough, So I'm going to be underwater soon, doobie 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 doo. End quote. People will be displaced from their homes due to heat and rising sea levels. It's an investment in future generations. Still, 8 minutes in, he was still going on about this nonsense. Questions were heard from Ciara Swale, HLM, Fintan Lawler, and Noah Barnley, regretfully. Following the debate of the questions in the House, the vote of speakerability sadly took place. There were 28 votes for the proposition, 12 off for the opposition, and 6 people wanted to go to Lavery's, so the opposition had it. No, sorry, the proposition had it. Well, I take the minutes as read.
Aye.
And now we move on to private members' business, where you can discuss anything you've seen in the news or that you just want to bring up. Do we have any pieces of private members' business? Oh, okay.
Okay, this actually isn't a stupid one for once. So this is something I've been thinking about, like for the past couple of weeks, about how. So we can all agree that there's a big problem now with people are getting radicalized politically. Like, I probably had guessed that a couple people in this room, or might know or have been like probably radicalized by something online. Yeah, I did too. I'll not say what. So like whether it be extreme left-wing groups or extreme right-wing groups, and it got me thinking about like during 2014 to 2016, we saw like a massive shift in the general sort of online sphere where most young people sort of engage with politics towards right-wing politics. You saw these sort of like compilations of like people sort of seeing liberals getting destroyed, and it got me thinking: is politics as entertainment? So in order to make something entertaining, it has to be made simpler. You need your good guys and your bad guys to sort of boil things out. You need like sort of entertaining sort of conflict going. So it got me thinking: does presenting politics as entertainment encourage political radicalization?
Ciara?
I think one of the main issues is the fact that, like, because of social media, AI, it basically gears you towards that extreme view. So, for example, I specifically remember I watched a critique video about a religious organisation, and then I proceeded to get awful videos in my feed for the next, say, 2 weeks. And the problem is, the more you watch of something, the more social media feeds that to you, and eventually it will give you more extreme stuff to absolutely guzzle down. And radicalization is a very interesting thing because, well, for a cult tried to recruit me once, that was about it. And
Which cult you last?
no. And like, I think a massive issue is that people aren't aware of how radicalization works and several things like that. Where people who try to get you into these groups typically try to pick on issues in your life and try to give you a sense of community in these groups and try to basically say that all your problems are because of some big mad agenda going on instead of you have issues you need to sort out. And the problem is that because people aren't aware of how radicalization works, how internet politics works, how people use these techniques to essentially get people to believe absolutely awful things on both sides, by the way. I think it's a problem that's going to continue to get worse until schools essentially start to try and educate people on how radicalization works and how internet politics works in general.
Anyone else on this? Jonathan?
I would say that when you compare the sort of Westminster parliamentary system to the American system, it's far more entertaining. If you watch the Senate or whatever in America, they're boring. Parliament, you can watch the PMQs, that's quite entertaining. But then when you take the British parliamentary system and you fill it with Australians, it gets even better. One time, an Australian minister brought in a fake pipe bomb to prove that the security wasn't good enough.
That's amazing.
Anyone else on this? Anyone else? Do we have a new piece of private members' business? Ryan?
In the Duchy of Lancaster, it was just revealed that anyone who dies and has assets that aren't willed to anyone, or they can't find an heir, it's willed to King Charles, and he's collected 60 million pounds worth of funds, and now they're talking about what to do with them, since having it be his own personal wealth seems a little bit wrong. I was wondering if anyone has suggestions on what to do with £60 million.
Daniel?
I'd like to first point out that the Duchy of Lancaster is not the King's personal wealth. And the second thing, £60 million, maybe they could give it to the Literific, whose accounts are looking and decreasing day by day. Quite nice. We could do with another new gallery, we could do with maybe buying the Senate room off Queen's or getting a custom made bake. So we should maybe make that suggestion to His Majesty the King.
Misha?
I reckon that's just about enough to buy me a pint of Lavery's afterwards.
Not anymore, we're at the post office. Anyone else on the money? Okay, Kira.
60 million boxes.
What's next?
125 your master's on.
Do we have this is Harry?
Harry Shaw. I'd like to know the House's opinion on the fun washing of Nigel Farage, now ironically finding himself in Bongo Land, the highest fee that's ever been paid out to a celebrity by around $1 million. The last being Matt Hancock, who was paid $400,000. Obviously didn't get the PPE bonus that Nigel Farage did. So what's the House's opinion on that?
Alkin?
Yes, so actually I think this kind of relates back to the point that the gentleman over there made about the increasing entertainment of politics. Now, this is not a new phenomenon that we're encountering. There's been a saying for years that politics is just acting for ugly people. It's just ugly people. But regardless of that, I think this does highlight the fact that being a politician is now a bit of a reality TV career. I mean, like Donald Trump, who was for a short period of time the most powerful man in the world, made his career from being a reality TV figure. So I think that we have to highlight that this is now a problem going forward, but it has always been a problem. And as Kira said about algorithms, look at how a politician can actually utilise that technology and utilise their own personal charm with they actually take advantage of that and move extreme views through guise of initially being quite dead on and sound into actually public discourse.
Jonathan?
What Open was saying, do you think we should sort of look into a viable alternative to democracy?
I'll go to you. Could you please state your name for the minutes?
Jackson Brewer. I don't think we need to worry about Farage being on the show because we can always just leave him there.
Do you have anything on this topic?
I just want to point this point. Having having politicians making a lot of money once they've sort of partly retired is nothing new. I don't think we should treat this as sort of any new phenomenon. Politicians make thousands, if not millions, a year after they leave office. This isn't any sort of new thing. But I'm also personally loving watching Nigel Farage take on these trials. It's very entertaining, and for that very selfish reason alone, we should keep having these funny people on our slate.
Cormac?
What does everyone think of the newly self-declared libertarian president of Argentina, Javier Milei, wants to retake the Falklands and the British?
I'll go to James first.
I actually can provide some context on this man, if I can describe that. So this man, he got his first pet dog 15 years ago. He called it Conan after Conan the Barbarian. And then when Conan died, sadly about 5 years ago, he went to do a seance where Conan informed him that he needed to A, clone him, and B, run for president. And then revealed that they had actually met in past life, where Conan was actually a lion and Milei was a gladiator in the Colosseum 2,000 years ago. Other facts about Mr. Milei, he is a cosplayer whose alter ego is Captain Handcap. Other aspects, he disowned his parents and then said, okay, then maybe not so bad. Other aspects, he's also a quote-unquote, and I know it was a tantric sex instructor.
Really?
Yes. He wants to legalise selling children organs and wants to abolish most of the welfare state. So honestly, by and large, compared to most politicians, there is mostly a step up.
Misha?
You left out a bit like his sister as the first lady.
That's weird.
This isn't Alabama.
Max?
I mean, to sort of go off on on Tom's point from the previous thing. This is the sort of very horrifying side effect of going, oh ho, funny politician, I'll give him a vote. What could go wrong? Because the one thing Orchard actually failed to mention is that one of his policies is that he's going to blow up the central bank of Chile. So he physically cannot print any more money. We will stop inflation dead in the water. This is as soon as we go into, oh yeah, Nigel Farage is funny because he's having to eat something really bad, and oh, Matt Hancock's funny because he's having to drown in the waters of Scotland. Like, this is the whole reason Boris Johnson got elected, because we all saw him as a funny Boris-like man. And then we all like, what could go wrong with him in charge? And now look where we are. So I think we should be careful about whether we should vote people for the sheer fact that they're kind of ludicrously funny.
Could you please state your name for minutes?
Oren, he's an anarcho-capitalist. Oh, sorry, just a minute. He's an anarcho-capitalist, and I think because capitalism is the greatest system to ever be invented, surely selling your organs should be reasonable for money and like full livers and everything. And I think they'll work out perfectly fine monetizing the Ministry of Education for kids, so can't see any problems.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to take a photo back, but not like no.
James?
His main opponent was the Minister of Finance in the country that has an inflation rate of 140%, has a poverty rate of 40%, and people are confused as to why the guy who's in charge of that lost to him. I mean, a serious point here, people in Argentina are so desperate with the political choices they had, where every government they had promises to change the economy and just ended up doing nothing. But they went for this candidate, so I think honestly, it's a logical choice at the end of the day, considering the fact that the alternative was just the same stuff that was got. The country that was once the wealthiest country in Latin America is now managed to basket case.
Okay, I'll take Cormac and then we'll move on to a new piece.
For a while now, I've been thinking that Literific should give patronages like other related societies, and I would like the House to have a vote over a vote to essentially give Javier Milei patronage for Literific.
Nobody second that. Nobody. Nobody second that. Do we have another piece of private members' business?
Point of order.
I don't have to accept that. Okay.
Okay, so today in the Doyle there's been a lot of talk about the triple lock on Irish military actions. I'd like to hear what people's opinions are on this. Will this affect Ireland's neutrality in any way? Have Sinn Féin, with their criticisms of the government, massively overplayed their hand? Because in actuality we have a policy in place in Ireland where the United States, Russia, China or the UK can effectively veto any foreign policy decision.
Or France.
Another joke, but it was after my time. And essentially, what are people's opinions on this matter? It's serious after the previous one.
Brian?
Given that there hasn't been a joint resolution or any Security Council resolution authorising peacekeeping using Irish troops since 2014, I think it's fair enough to remove the triple lock, given that it's just a paralysis of Ireland's military capabilities, and no other nation on the planet allows its military might to be essentially governed by other nations.
Jonathan?
I don't disagree, but what would you do first when the triple lock was abolished? Which country would you want to have?
Ryan?
France.
Ryan again.
Can we also do all the French protectorates? So like most of Africa?
Well, to be honest, not really much anymore.
Okay. I will take one more point, and it will be from you, and it better be a little bit serious.
France is full of nuclear reactors, and the Irish government is very, very scared of nuclear reactors, so invading France just wouldn't be feasible.
Okay, and now we will move on to President's Questions, where you have 5 minutes to ask me anything you want, as long as it's not political. Okay, Brian.
If, when the triple lock's removed, what country would you invade first?
France. Here.
Are Percy books not the most vile thing on earth, and people who enjoy them should be euthanized?
Shame.
They hated Jesus for he told them the truth.
I'm sure they're fine. They're just gummy sweets.
How an opinion for one.
No, but Well, I don't eat them because I'm vegetarian, but I think you can get vegetarian ones. You can get vegan ones, yeah, I just haven't had them, but I'm sure they're nice.
They're not.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, Harry?
Have you seen Napoleon yet?
No, I haven't, but I really, really want to, actually. It was funded by Apple. Why are Apple funding movies now? Sad. But anyway, Olkin?
Would you agree that Hufflepuff House is the worst house in all of Harry Potter?
Yeah, sure, yeah. I don't know.
It's not very good.
I feel like all of them are probably bad in their own way. Yeah. Ryan?
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Oh. I had toast with butter on it, and it was really nice, and it was really plain and boring, and I could lie and say that I had like swan or something, but apparently you don't approve of that, so I'm not going to do it anymore. I'll go to Max.
What is the president's favourite films?
Oh,
you asked this last time.
No, you asked favourite book.
Typed it down.
I've never watched a Wuthering Heights film, and I don't think I will because I don't like the idea of them making Heathcliff into a romantic hero. But anyway, With Neil and I is my favourite movie.
What?
With Neil and I.
Can you spell that?
WITHNAIL and, but like it's one of those like curly ones, and then I. Jonathan.
What are the president's views on fascism?
That was an easy one, but that was easy. Come on.
No, because I can't have any pleasure.
Cancer breast.
Okay, I have no opinions on fascism. I hate you so much. I'm not doing Irish Times with you anymore. No, I'm still doing it. I'm just going to kick him away. Do you have any other questions?
This new pub we're going to, does it have a dress code?
No.
Just for you.
Yeah. Suit and tie, black tie.
Oh.
Do we have any other questions? I'll take one more. Oh, Kier.
When did you have breakfast this morning?
Oh, it was literally like 4 in the afternoon, actually. Not very good. With that, we will move on to the vote of prior opinion. So if you side with the proposition tonight, if you believe that there is a viable alternative to democracy, please raise your hand now.
We abstained on the next
14? Yeah. Okay. And if you side with the opposition, you do not believe there is a viable alternative to democracy, please raise your hand now. 1, 2, 14 again? Okay. And if you would like to abstain on this motion, you don't agree with either side, please raise your hand now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7? Could we have the vote of prior opinion?
Yeah, on this question of whether democracy is the worst thing ever. There were 14 votes for aye, 13 for nay, and 7 abstentions. So by a command and size control margin, but legally in this case,
Okay, brilliant. And before we get into the speeches, I would like to read out the rules, and they're a little bit different this time. So each speech is 7 minutes long. The first and last minute are protected time, which will be signalled by the bell down there, meaning that you can only POI people in the middle 5 minutes. The audience cannot POI because this is judged. The only people that can POI are those competing because you get marks for it. To POI, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or just POI. Please keep your POIs to 10 seconds and no barracking, meaning wait at least 15 seconds after giving a POI to give another one. Also, very importantly, no back and forth. If you need to leave the room at any time, please do so quietly between speeches, and remember that the noise from outside does travel. And lastly, no swearing. And with that, I would like to welcome Jonathan.
Sorry, just
Wait, what?
one thing to clarify. So you know how at the end when everybody gives their speech, like people in the audience can ask either side like question. Are we not doing that?
We are doing questions, yeah, but it'll be while the judges are out of the room.
For a really long time if the judges are discussing them on the
Yeah.
We've had it working for like 25 minutes.
Yeah, so you still get to do questions, it's just not judged. Yeah.
I recommend again.
within a minute if we were out there for a really long time, because that happened when we took about an hour and a half judging, which we will not do. I'm not just point out.
All right, okay, brilliant. And I'd like to welcome Jonathan Massey up to open the proposition.
I find it funny that today we're debating democracy, given that since it's the Godkin Newcomers debate, none of you have a say in who wins at the end. But FDR said, the democratic aspiration is no mere recent phase in human history. It is human history. It permeated the ancient life of early peoples. It blazed in the Middle Ages. It was written in the Magna Carta. But of course, British democracy didn't really start with the Magna Carta. In fact, the very earliest you could claim British democracy started is a mere 20 years before the founding of this society, with the Great Reform Act of 1832, which was neither great nor offered much reform, but increased the number of people who could vote from around 0 to a whopping 20% of the population. Now, of course, we know 1832 is relatively recently. Democracy was around far before that. Democracy predates the Magna Carta, it predates Jesus. It was around before 5 of the 7 wonders of the world. It was before the arrival of humans to Madagascar. I'm talking, of course, about Athenian democracy, one man, one vote. And I do mean one man, because if you were a woman or an immigrant or a child or a slave or just born into a poor family, you had no say. I think it tells us something of modern democracy that we base our systems so heavily off that which the Greeks and Romans pioneered, that we are inspired by them, that the architecture reflects it, from the columns and porticos of Whitehall to the neoclassical palaces of Washington, D.C. Alexander Hamilton, the founding father, said the Roman Republic attained to the utmost height of human greatness. And I think there's been a strange decline from that ideal of a Senate, a people, a republic, SPQR, stamped at the bottom of public documents, inscribed across monuments and great public works, and found on the coins in your pocket and the banners carried into battle, to where democracy is today. And I refer, of course, to blonde idiots who stand up and talk for no reason for far too long. Not just me, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. They represent a rise in populism, a decline in the trust inherent to democracy. They break laws whilst in power. They discredit elections. They discredit the media. They ignore the independence of the judiciary. 72% of South Africans would accept a non-elected government, a non-democratic government, if it just meant that jobs went up and the amount of housing supply went up. I think that tells you a lot about how well democracy is working there. In the UK, 55% of British people are dissatisfied with democracy. Only a quarter of our population voted for Brexit, but we are shackled with the consequences. And this sort of distrust in democracy is not a new concept. The very founder of this society, E.L. Godkin, when he wasn't arguing against votes for women, said, "The government cannot touch trade and commerce without breeding corruption." In 2009, the British government set out to build 500 kilometres of north-south high-speed rail to connect the country. 14 years later, only 230 kilometres will be finished, and it'll only be finished in 2033. Let's compare this to an undemocratic state. Let's compare this to China. China in 2009 also set out to build high-speed rail. Do you know how much they built in the last 14 years? 42,000 kilometres of high-speed rail. That makes the 230 kilometres that the UK government hopes to have finished sometime in the 2030s seem like a mere rounding error. Democracy is too short-term. The focus is on the next election. The focus is getting elected. And democracy attracts career politicians. It doesn't attract the people who would be good at leading. It attracts the people who have the rhetoric, who have the sort of personality that a democratic leader needs to get elected by the people. Go ahead.
Non-democratic systems, all they're doing is attracting people to lead who have a lust for power and violence.
I disagree, and I think I'll go into that a little bit later, but I would say that the Chinese system doesn't necessarily do this in terms of the meritocracy. But I'd like to say, in a strange way, there's been no decline from Rome to today at all. Rome was never intended as a democracy. Polybius writes that an undemocratic mix of kingship, democracy, and aristocracy was what led to Rome's power, what led to Rome's stability. And we would be best to remember that the Roman Republic lasted 500 years. Of course, the empire that was undemocratic then lasted 1,500 years, but the things that are characterized as ending the Roman Republic are wealth inequality, partisan gridlock, political populism, violent rhetoric. I think these are things all present in today's democracy, but we We know democracy is flawed. Churchill is supposed to have said it's the worst form of government except from all the others that have been tried. But I disagree. I don't think it's really a form of government. I think it's a series of forms of government. And I don't think it's a form of government, but governance. It isn't just confined to government. It's found its way into schools, workplaces, trade unions, corporations. I mean, look at our student union, which transforms simple tasks into grand labyrinthine puzzles. No, but I want to talk about corporate governance.
The Literific.
I want to talk about corporate governance, where democratic ideas have created shareholder democracy and worker-led democracies. These are both worse ways of running companies than through more undemocratic sort of founder-led models, which generate, on average, 31% more patents and greater growth than a democratically led company. This is to say, founder-led companies, undemocratic companies, are viable alternatives to democratically run companies. They are viable alternatives to democracy. But I'd like to sort of finish by talking about what viability is. I think viability is a successful alternative to democracy. But to be successful is sort of weird. Democracy isn't very successful. So I wouldn't say it's about the protection of people necessarily, because democracies don't protect their people. Democracies don't protect people at all. The UK and US, the great bastions of democracy, they are regularly commit war crimes. I mean, the US tacitly supported the genocide in Guatemala, and both the US and the UK torture prisoners and overthrow foreign governments. How are these any better than dictatorships? 81 elections were tampered with between 1945 and 2000. That's over one election a year. That is a ridiculous rate for these so-called democratic, ideal states. So I think survival, sort of sustainability, is the only requirement for a system to be viable alternative. And I'd like to close by bringing up Oman. In 751, Oman was founded as an imamate, and it survives today as an undemocratic monarchy. Oman has the best quality of life in Asia and is rated 7th best worldwide as of the last year. So my question to the opposition, my question tonight, is if Oman can be undemocratic and have such good outcomes for its citizens, how is it not a viable state? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and I'd like to welcome Ryan Ford from the opposition.
Thank you. What's being presented by the proposition tonight is a magical alternative to democracy. But what you heard from Jonathan, he didn't actually give an alternative, he just threw out an awful lot of buzzwords. That's not just misguiding the people of this house, that is dangerous and it's damaging to our society. He didn't give you any options, but the options which I hope the final three speakers will give you are not going to work. Putting a strongman at the top of our society has not, will not, and never will solve our problems. Instead, it surrenders control of one crucial aspect of our lives, our humanity. It's a one-way ticket to oppression, and you can't go back, and you're trading it off for the illusion of efficiency and some sort of semi-competence. They will stand there and they will tell us of our superiority. They'll say that we are, quote-unquote, the greatest nation. But in reality, what we have done is we've surrendered a crucial element of our lives, our soul, and our humanity. They can stand there and they can tell you of technocracy, of meritocracy, of aristocracy and monarchy. But these are just oppression of the actual, the ordinary, and the rest of us, the so-called unimportant. Regardless of skill or background, you, me, and everyone else in the house has a right to self-determination. Rich or poor, it is your right.
On that point?
Yes.
You talk about how these states disregard that, but for example, take a democracy such as South Africa, which up until 1990 disenfranchised the majority of the black population for the simple fact that they were black. Democracies do not inherently mean everyone has the free right to equality.
What I hope you do during your speech is define democracy, but I'm going to do it now. Democracy is not actually a system of governance, and I really hope you don't overlook that. Democracy is a term of praise for a system of governance which is by the people and works for the people. It does its best to work for the people. That's the key. Us. It's ours. We shape it, run it, destroy it, rebuild it, and as such, it's a fundamental part of the human condition. South Africa was disenfranchising black voters, and that was awful. But that was a democracy that was not working. But democracy, as a concept, is still workable. If you need further reason to discount all these nutty ideas I just threw out, technocracy, meritocracy, aristocracy, monarchy, just know that Elon Musk loves them, which means that they're just a recipe for patriarchy where your father has to own an emerald mine. They will place themselves atop a pedestal on the bones of the rest of humanity. Do not let the proposition tonight pull the wool over your eyes and blind you from realizing your own destiny. Democracy arises from our will to be free, to avoid slavery, and to never be subject to the will of one singular other.
On that point?
No. The beauty of democracy lies within its flaws. It's not perfect. We learn, it evolves, we look back, and we fix our mistakes. That's what happened in South Africa because someone else realized what was happening. I'll take Ellie.
So democracy sort of necessarily sticks to 3 or 4 short terms to stop dictatorships happening. How do you ever address long-term issues like climate change in that situation?
Democracy, like I said, wasn't perfect. It never is. However, if you move to a dictatorship or some other form of governance where you have someone at the top, somewhere where the people no longer get a say, you are committing to that path. You are committing to selling yourself out with a one-time transaction. Your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of your descendants will be sold into that system. And yes, it may think, no thank you. Yes, it may make things more difficult, but it is not a trade-off worth making. Democracy brings challenges. It's hard long-term. It brings political gridlock, it brings polarization, it brings inefficiency. But those are not inherent flaws. In fact, they're challenges that demand our attention. So is climate change. It motivates every citizen to work better. It motivates opposing views to come together and have discourse and help each other to understand the issues and to better work for our society. Democracy is quite slay, as it's the only thing which grants a shred of power to the masses. It is vital as it allows the people, the citizens, to form the collective frameworks for public deliberation. That's how we solve climate change. That's how we commit to net zero, much against what I argued last week. No. That is how we bring change over time. Every modern, successful nation, apart from Oman, it has an awful lot of oil, Jonathan, is built on a tapestry of democratic progress. Woven into its threads are the fibers of diverse voices, and altogether these form a collective knot of our strength. Do not let them convince you to surrender your fundamental beliefs. Do not let them to convince you to accept the risk of the deaths and persecutions of 1.5 million dead children in Nazi Germany. Do not let them convince you that the 2,000 children stolen from their parents in the Soviet Union and became forced orphans are just an unfortunate statistic. Same goes for the 40 to 80 million dead in Mao's China. Do not let them convince you that a so-called benevolent monarch who came from nepotism is inbred and has a demagogue-esque attitude. Denying aid to their people during times of famine is okay. Queen Victoria refused £4,000 of aid from the Sultan of Oman for the Irish famine because she herself had only donated 1,000. That's oppression.
On that point?
Yugoslavia was not a functioning alternative because it ended up in genocide. When these massive dictatorships, monarchies collapse, they end in tragedy. Democracy manages to rebuild itself. How many times must history scream in our faces before we reject these nonsensical suggestions? These are ludicrous alternatives being proposed. Democracy may not grant us total and immediate freedom, but it does give us the freedom to attain it. It prevents us from being locked out of our own governance and is a construct of the human condition. We currently possess the capability to, within the space of a day, hours even, cause a man-made nuclear mass extinction event, but we don't do it. Instead, we've embraced the better angels of our nature, and we're at the most peaceful point in human history. This peaceful period arose with democracy and holds steadfast because of it. I don't know tonight whether you want to conclude, it's protected time. I don't know whether you want to conclude tonight if the proposition are dumb, delusional, or downright dangerous. I'll let you decide that. They will show you alternative paths. They will show you the allure of authoritarianism and the whims of a single individual, how that can bring government. It can make it look simple. Occam's razor says never accept that which is simple, it is not the best path. Hanlon's razor says never to attribute to malice that which can be accurately explained by stupidity. I hope the proposition are stupid tonight and not just evil. Cling to democracy like your firstborn child. Cling to democracy as it's the only thing you have tying you to your rights as a human being. Cling to it and never let go, because as soon as you let go, you are setting sail on a path that you can no longer control. You're pushing the raft down the river and you're letting the currents take you places you really don't want to be. Cling to democracy. It's the only shred of hope we've got. Thank you.
sounds stupid. It's not nice.
I'd like
I'll call
to
that
call
stupid too.
Max Kieran as second proposition.
Well, that was a speech. Well, if the first speaker from the opposition needs to describe us all as authoritarian fascists for some reason, he'll be sorely disappointed. Now, I just want to address the audience for a second and ask, what do you think of whenever you hear the word democracy? Now, that's a rhetorical question because audience participation is the devil's work, but if that was an actual question, I imagine a lot of you would say freedom. The freedom to choose your own elected officials, the freedom to express your own opinions, the freedom to protest. Some of the greatest strengths as a democratic state is that it instills a greatest sense of freedom and control. But freedom isn't inherent to a democratic state. It's not the rule of the many, it's an electoral system, as was described in every modern democracy, representative, direct, as I'll describe later. In fact, in recent years, we've seen the rise of what's known as an illiberal democracy, a democracy that does not inherently believe in your right to freedom, but believe it's deserved by the very few, normally the people who are running the state. Take Orban's Hungary, Putin's Russia, Colombia, Bolivia. These are systems that outwardly reject the principle that freedom is your given right as a citizen of that state. Journalists who investigate corruption are imprisoned. Corruption is rampant. That doesn't really sound like freedom, does it? No, is the answer. These systems of government are on the rise worldwide as we see the rise of populist systems of parties. And as a result, many political commentators are suggesting that similar systems are likely to make their way into our current political system as well. How you view the conservative government, make up your mind. Now, this is a flaw that exists in any system that involves representatives, which for the majority of democracies in the world is the case. In fact, every single one involves a representative system. So instead of equality, it inherently establishes a ruling class of people who have the connections to be able to seek candidacy, whether it has the wealth, whether they know somebody who went to university with them, that ends the brakes. And it therefore expels pretty much the majority of the working population who don't. So it becomes less of a freedom to choose the candidate that represents your views, and instead, which member of the Bullingdon Club do you think is going to screw you over the least?
On that point.
Yeah, sure.
You're mischaracterizing democracy as something where everyone has to vote. That's not what democracy actually is, as I defined. Democracy, you're falling into the trap of this abstract notion of assembling more and more people in one room. Democracy is a system by the people that works for the people. There's no textbook definition. How are you going to address that?
Well, actually, you talk about how it's by the people for the people. By inherently saying that, you're saying that people have to participate. And as a result, the more people who participate, the better democracy works, surely. So if we are disenfranchising a large majority of the population from being able to stand and represent their own views, you're inherently making the case that current democracy as it stands is unviable. In fact, my statement before is only partially of a joke. For the past 13 years, 85% of our prime ministers have been from that Bullingdon Club. So around 200 people have been running a country of 67 million. So that's really a good showcase of freedom and equality. No. So a continued existence in this manner is basically going nowhere, but increasing corruption and shifting the freedom, what is apparently the best thing about our system, away. And instead focusing on corporate interests. I don't need to talk much about how America focuses on that. We've all got an interest in politics, or we've done a politics degree. But we don't need to see the fact that the terminal stage of a representative democracy, as long as we continue down this pathway, will be undoubtedly worse for anyone whose surname isn't Bezos. So what's our options here? Well, to pursue the goals of having freedom, the proposition is actually going to show you how it only takes a few steps. So step one is the removal of representatives from politics. We are clear that that's a bad thing. It prevents us from establishing an elite structure of people who have the connections, and it means the majority amount of people can represent their own views and get collective discussion. So step two is therefore to create these avenues of discussion now that they're no longer representatives. The existing institutions that we have are intended to be divisive, which is not conducive to good policy making. It creates a win-lose mindset, us versus them, like win or lose proposition and opposition. We're even seeing it right now. Now, So as such, we need to create a system that focuses on win-win, a system of government that goes for the best solution objectively, rather than which side makes the more persuasive argument. So the opposition would propose one viable solution, and only the one. My fellow speakers are going to go into alternatives. Citizens' assemblies, which we have present in Scotland and the Republic, in which citizens come together to discuss collective decision-making and create policies that basically maximize the success. So, everyone involved in decision-making, it removes the fuel of us versus them, and it allows us to survive through the constant electoral cycle, which fuels this division in society and minimizing the chance of corruption. Now, I'm seeing some worried faces in the audience. You're thinking that I'm transitioning to democracy, still democracy. No, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Direct democracy does not go far enough because it still installs the institutions of power, those divisive institutions that allow for not good decision-making. Instead, well, it also includes binary referendums, which are, I mean, look, we're living in the United Kingdom, we can see how bad those go. So, instead, the proposition would propose a potentially gradual shift from representative democracy to direct democracy to an anarchist state. Now, I know that sounds like a scary word. I mean, you're probably imagining like flashbacks to Laszlo for anyone who was in Dublin, and chaos personified. Yet that's a fundamentally flawed understanding of human nature. We're told that we're selfish and rude to justify the actions of those in a representative democracy who have been corrupted by the excesses of power, or the media's consistent drive to secure headlines by highlighting all of the bad while not talking about the majority of good. Stanford prison and broken glass are often what comes up, yet the fact is that the Stanford prison guards were actors who were told the exact results that were wanted and how to get them, and the fact is that research from Marie Lingard in Denmark shows that 90% of the time, whenever a dangerous situation is present, human beings will help out to help each other. So the psychologist's quest for academic recognition have plagued our society with false assumptions, which can be ripped under with a simple question. If we are selfish and for our own interests, how and why do charities exist and people donate to them? Now, the opposition might try to suggest that this is a logistical nightmare. Scale this up to 10,000, divided by 50. Yeah, okay. I believe I've summed up the proposition's case, and I hope you vote all for it.
Thank you, Max, and I'd like to welcome Sharon for the second proposition.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies, gentlemen, everything in between. Today I stand before you to affirm a notion that has held true throughout history and continues to resonate in the modern world. Democracy is our only viable form of government. Our only viable form of government. This I shall endeavour to prove to you using the concept of democratic peace theory, a theory that is as close as anything we have to an empirical law when it comes to international relations. At its core, democratic peace theory asserts that the democratic nations, those governed by the voice of the people, the vox populi, if you will, do not engage in conflicts with one another. This isn't a mere coincidence, but a testament to the fundamental values and mechanisms inherent in democratic systems. It has been proven that democratic nations are less prone to conflict escalation and are more inclined towards diplomatic resolutions. Firstly, let's acknowledge the essence of democracy itself. Democracy embodies the principle of self-governance, where the people have the power to elect representatives and influence decisions that impact their lives. It fosters a culture of dialogue, compromise and tolerance, a system that inherently prioritises diplomacy over aggression, where leaders are accountable to their citizens. They are less likely to pursue reckless and aggressive foreign policies that lead to conflict. Moreover, democratic nations tend to embrace transparency, open debate and the rule of law. These qualities significantly reduce the likelihood of conflicts spiralling out of control. When disputes arise, democratic nations have the mechanisms in place to address them through peaceful means such as negotiations, mediation, and international institutions.
On that point?
No, thank you. They are more likely to engage in dialogue, find common ground, and seek mutual understanding, rather than resorting to hostility and warfare.
Point of information.
No. Now, let's consider history's testament to this theory. If we examine the record of conflicts over the past century, the evidence is compelling. Democracies, more often than not, have maintained peace among themselves. The absence of major conflicts between established democracies is a testament to the stabilising effect of democratic governance on international relations. While conflicts do exist globally, the absence of full-scale wars between democratic nations is a striking validation of democratic peace theory. We can confidently conclude, therefore, that democracies, while not immune to conflict, avoid wars with one another.
On that point?
Yeah.
What about wars between Armenia, Azerbaijan, between India and Pakistan, between Greece and Turkey, in the proxy war over Cyprus? What about the fact that the US has been at war for, I think, like 80% or more of its existence as a country?
I think with the US, I'm not sure that's a fantastic example, but I'd say overall these are outliers rather than the rule, and that conflicts between two democracies which qualify properly as democratic, not just calling themselves democratic and leaving it at there, are rare. So, if we delve into the past century, a notable example emerges: the absence of full-scale wars between established democracies. In fact, since the end of World War II, no two established democracies have engaged in direct war with one another.
On that point?
No. This period coincides with a significant increase in the number of democratic nations globally, providing us with empirical evidence supporting the notion that democracies do not engage in armed conflict with one another. We even have statistical data to support this, as a study conducted by political scientists found that democracies are significantly less likely to go to war with one another than their non-democratic regimes.
On that point?
No. This analysis, spanning over 2 centuries of data, demonstrated a clear correlation between democratic governance and peace among nations. In contrast, history reveals numerous instances of conflicts involving non-democratic regimes. The 20th century saw devastating wars led by authoritarian and totalitarian governments, resulting in unparalleled human suffering and global turmoil. Now, the skeptics on the proposition may point to isolated incidents, as my friend Jonathan did, where democratic nations clashed. However, these occurrences are outliers within a broader context of peace. When compared to non-democratic regimes, the instances of democratic nations engaging in armed conflict with one another are statistically minuscule.
On that point?
No, thank you. The prevalence of peace between democracies holds true when examined across various regions and historical periods. In addition to this, the interconnectedness of economies and the rise of globalization further solidify the case for democratic peace. As nations become economically interdependent, the cost of conflict skyrockets, and the potential economic consequences become a deterrent. Democratic nations understand the detrimental impact that war has, not only on lives, but also on economies and global stability. No, thank you. This shared understanding incentivizes peaceful resolutions and cooperative agreements, rather than military confrontations. In conclusion, the evidence and principles behind democratic peace theory highlight a critical truth. Democracy stands as the only viable form of government precisely because it fosters peace, stability, and cooperation among nations. We can see, therefore, that while the proposition may attempt to entice you with alternatives and ask them to trust you with their state of anarchy, we know the truth, that they just want to watch the world burn. Democracy is our only option if we are to aim for a world in which conflicts are settled through dialogue rather than the destructive forces of warfare. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for being here, for listening, and for largely still being awake. I was going to begin by recognising that I'm probably addressing a room full of Democrats, but it does appear that we've got a plucky anarchist in the room, and I'm sure we have a healthy quota of socialists among us as well, so maybe I underestimated the political diversity of Literific. But nonetheless, in the UK, we're steeped in pro-democratic sentiment from infancy. We reject contending ideas on impulse. But let's have a look at just what it is that makes the UK system viable in the first place, given that viability is what this debate is all about. What gives our democracy the efficacy which the opposition would have you believe that all the alternatives lack? Because the aspects of our state which make it viable are the non-democratic ones. The judiciary, the finest in the world, is intentionally and fundamentally undemocratic. The executive and the legislature are mostly run by Parliament, which is half comprised of unelected lords, and by the civil service, which is utterly undemocratic. So what is it that gives UK democracy its viability? It's the balance of powers between unelected arms of state. You can see that our democracy is only made viable by undemocratic means, so we have to open our minds to the possibility that a non-democratic system could be valid too, and I propose a meritocracy. So what's wrong with democracy to start off with, and then how do we fix it? Well, the etymology of democracy has been popularly described as power for the people, but if we actually look at the Greek translation, demos can also be translated to mob, and suddenly perhaps power for the mob sounds somewhat less appealing. The only viable form of democracy today is a representative system where politicians are elected in the interests of the people, but we have conflicting interests here. The politicians would like to be in power, and they are thus fundamentally incentivized to limit the political education of the people. This is exactly what's happened. In the US, under a quarter of Americans actually know who their senators are. Two-thirds of people in the UK have never read a political manifesto in their lives. In this way, far from being empowered, the people can become the tool of politicians, forming a mob which undermines democracy itself, and once undermined, a system can't be called viable. So to illustrate this threat, I'm going to use some history, but it does involve cross-dressing Romans and some incest, so bear with me. We think of it as permanent, but UK democracy is only 200 years old at most. The Roman Republic is the longest functioning political democracy in history. It made 300 years without political violence or capital punishment. But it was ended by populism. Claudius Pulcher gained notoriety by dressing up as a Vestal Virgin in efforts to seduce Caesar's wife. But he nonetheless managed to shed his aristocratic background and become tribune of the plebs, promising a grain dole and raising a militia, which eventually drove democracy from Rome. He was an utterly ridiculous figure, also well known for sleeping with his sister, but his populist appeal created the chaos for Caesar to take power, disbanding the Republic and ascending as a dictator. With the ascendancy of populist politics in the West, from Johnson to Giorgia Meloni to Trump, who literally incited a populist riot in the capital in an eerily Claudian manner, the threat of populism has never been more real. We should pay attention to the lessons of Rome as we draw closer to what has been a 300-year expiry date on democracy. Meritocracy, however, addresses this fundamental conflict of democracy that an elected leader is incentivized to keep the people in the dark. Confucius founded his political theory in the belief that each member of society should be given the best opportunities in education. It follows that those showing naturally greater moral and political talents should be advantaged in the pursuit of a political career. As a result, meritocracy simply has superior leadership.
On that point.
Yeah.
Since you're proposing a meritocracy, who in your opinion is the most qualified to be Prime Minister?
The very point is that probably most of the current candidates wouldn't even be there if we're dealing in a meritocratic system, because they would have been there on their merit, and I think the current selection probably wouldn't have made the cut. So China's one-party system uses meritocracy to produce professional statespeople who rival the West in effective governance. Now, I know that their human rights record is poor, and this would have to be checked by a robust judicial system, but if you look over to Cuba, where we've got an authoritarian, they still have a robust judicial system, so the two are compatible. China also does lack political diversity, but this could be preserved in the constitution, allowing for multiple parties. I'm not proposing a completely Chinese system, it's just that there are a lack of options for modern examples for current meritocracy, given the dominance of democracy. But if we do look over to Italy, Mario Draghi adopted meritocratic ideas in his technocrat government elected for pandemic recovery, and it was hugely effective. Italy reached pre-COVID economic output by late 2021, ahead of much of Europe. Now, democracy assumes that giving the people power will give the people what they need, but this is just an error of psychology. People vote for short-term gain regardless of the long-term impact. Reason is the slave of the passions, as Hume argued. This is exploited by politicians and they well know it. For example, in pre-election tax cuts, are you really voting for what you need if you're just seeing that income tax has been cut by like a fraction of a percentage point and voting for that party? Such a system will never address existential long-term threats such as climate change, but meritocracy would elect leaders to solve these highest priority problems first. It places the needs of the people rather than what they're manipulated to want at the centre of politics. So this isn't a complete political doctrine for a new system of governance, and the motion doesn't require that. but it is a viable alternative. We need to recognise that democracy leads to short-term governance, to minority oppression, and to manipulation of the public will, to recent and near-catastrophic effect in America. To oppose this motion, you ignore all these flaws. You ignore that any other option could possibly work, where meritocracy could give us better governance, longer-term planning, and a public who work to govern. Thank you.
Good evening, judges, lords, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honoured to be up here defending democracy, and although the third prop speaker has already alluded to it, I would just like to refer back to Demos Kratos. Demos meaning people and Kratos meaning power. The Greek tragedy of Prometheus Bound depicts the titan Prometheus as he steals fire from the gods and brings it to the people. In doing so, he creates a newfound independence that mankind never had. They were no longer reliant upon the benevolence of the all-controlling, all-powerful gods. And filled with incandescent rage that the masses now possessed powers of their own, Zeus condemns Prometheus to eternal punishment. And whilst those of us today advocating empowerment of the masses could be hit with some punishment from the prop, maybe they would also like us to have our liver eaten every day by a bird as Prometheus did. Nonetheless, I would just like to comment briefly on your point about anarchism. We saw the feelings of the Paris Commune with its lack of internal organisation. It was crushed by counter-revolution. Anarchism has killed a Russian Tsar, President of Italy and France, the King of Greece, the King of Portugal, and an American President. So if you're advocating violence, go for it, but that's not what democracy is about. Of course.
You see, democracy isn't about violence, but as I stated in my speech, the USA and the UK have a shocking history of violent acts in wars where they've consistently broken human rights, international law, and as I said, the US even supported a genocide in Guatemala.
Yes, they're political actors, and as you already showed in your speech earlier, you do not care for principle. You're talking about output in China, which is economics rather than principle, and democracy is founded on principle. Actors can be removed and disposed of. But I'm not going to suggest for a moment that democracy is without flaws. After all, I'm not very interested in the totalitarian doctrine of ideological infallibility. You already brought up the Churchill quote, and I would just say at the beginning of the quote, Churchill says that democracy has been tried many times and will be again because we live in a world of sin and woe. And that is the beauty of democracy, is that you can try again and again to make a more representative democracy. Not an anarchist one, but a more representative and principled one. It was the great Margaret Thatcher who said, "When people are free to choose, they choose freedom. Liberty is a state of mind. Laws can be broken and ignored. Institutions can be subverted and tarnished. But you cannot force someone to be free, because a people become free when it desires, when they desire, and they remain free because they choose to do so."
On that point?
Of course.
So you're talking about how institutions can be corrupted. So therefore, would technically, by your own quotation from the Margaret Thatcher,
You should have said the great.
previous one, would therefore a viable alternative to a democratic state not be one in which those corruptible institutions do not exist?
Well, I'll address institutions later on in my speech, but those with an inkling of historical understanding will recall the innumerable instances when nations of people have been cast into the pitfalls of misery, shackled by coercion, fettered by fear. Because when democracy is displaced, freedom is put at risk. And when that is done, it gives the state more power than it needs to have. The state ought to be your servant, not your master, and freedom is the most important of all concepts in this world. Without it, we risk the safety of individuals. Democracy affords the greatest sovereignty to the individual, and it is only through democracy that the sanctity of freedom can truly be protected. Without freedom of speech, freedom of public meeting, and freedom of association, there cannot be free elections. And without them, there can be no true parliamentary democracy. Democracy means that the people must be free. The free choose the rulers, and the rulers govern according to the wishes of the people. They are subservient to those whom conferred responsibility onto them. It is not the duty of the state nor the obligation of individuals to coerce individuals into supporting a regime through odious means. Democracy, no thank you. Democracy is the only solution to enabling people precisely because it relies upon the power of persuasion through education and the freedom to choose your preference. Talking of institutions, the rule of law, one of the fundamental pillars of democracy, is absolutely paramount. In 1215 we had the Magna Carta, in 1679 we had habeas corpus, and in 1688 we had the Glorious Revolution, which brought further constraints upon those who were intent on evading the law, each of these serving as a direct response to legal inequality at times. It is democracy which affords us this legal equality. Forgive me. In a democracy, if anyone is penalised, it is not for breaking some rule dreamt up by an ingenious minister or marvellous official without any scrutiny. The conviction must be for a proven breach of the established law of the land, and only given out by independent judicial figures, least of all by a small group of individuals tasked with doing the government's bidding, as the People's Court under Roland Freisler did. The separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary in a democracy is of paramount importance. It was Dicey who said, "Every man, whatever be his rank or his condition, be subject to ordinary law of the realm, and amenable to the jurisdiction of the ordinary tribunals. No one individual in this democratic nation is above the law. No one of us is higher than the constraints of the independent judiciary."
On that point?
No, thank you. We all accept that the democracy and the rule of law go hand in hand. The staples of any regime which subverts the rule of law remain all too familiar. The midnight knock on the door, the sudden disappearance, the show trial, the subjection of prisoners to experiments, confession via torture, the gulag, the concentration camp, the list goes on. We may have gluttonous lawyers and wishy-washy judges. Sometimes we even have trial by media, but only through democracy can the rule of law peacefully be upheld. There is no alternative to democracy which upholds the principles of justice so well. As John Locke wrote in 1690, "Wherever law ends, tyranny begins." Each generation has to stand up for democracy. We cannot take anything for granted, and we have to fight fundamental battles anew. It was Goethe who said, "That which thy fathers bequeathed thee, earn it anew, thou wouldest possess it." There is no viable alternative, and history is littered with examples of insidious and lamentable characters who have done their very best to manipulate and destroy democracy, because, like Zeus, they fear the people having control of their own affairs. They fear accountability. They fear truth rather than anything else. And they want tyranny to prevail. So I would urge every one of you to be like a modern day Prometheus and steal fire from the gods.
And I'd like to invite Angelica Foley to close the proposition. Members of the House, over the course of this debate, we've heard countless different arguments from the opposition. But I must remind you that the purpose of this debate is not to find the perfect alternative to democracy, but merely to acknowledge, to believe that there is a viable alternative to democracy. And so far, by my count, the proposition has not only given you one alternative, in fact, we've actually given you several. Max has stated the case for anarchy. We've also heard about the many benefits and merits, if I may, of meritocracy. So we can't say that there is no alternative, because we literally have given you some. And first off, I must say, the first speaker of the proposition, you finished off by saying that we must cling to democracy like it was our only child. That's great, but let's look at the democracies of Israel and the democracy of America, and how they're working together to ensure that the last Palestinians in Gaza are not alive to cling to their only children. How many orphans are there in Gaza by these democracies? On that point, go ahead.
If you're going to define anywhere that claims to be a democracy as a democracy, you've also got to include North Korea as a democracy, and if you're willing to do that, you're just tarnishing the entire debate. Of course there'll be an alternative to democracy in that case. Israel, if it describes itself as democratic, is not necessarily democratic. Neither is any state, but it's democracy as a concept you have to prove.
Of course, I can prove the concept of democracy, but what I'm saying is North Korea, it's well acknowledged that it's a dictatorship. We all know this.
there are elections in America and there are elections in Israel. America is quite often referred to as one of the greatest democracies in the world. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love a democracy. I'm thrilled to live in a modern democratic country with a fully functioning assembly. Oh wait, we don't really have one. You see, it's kind of just the thing with democracy, it's just not that great. It's not all it's cracked up to be. On the one hand, the Kiwis vote in Jacinda Ardern, who's an absolute girl boss and I'm sure we all admire. But then the Americans vote in Donald Trump. And as we had a discussion about this earlier, he's more of a reality TV star than anything else. Go for it.
Would you not accept that the beauty of democracy is people can learn from their mistakes? It's that national self-determination, and they learn if they elect someone who performs perfectly.
Well, I think that's interesting, but I'm not sure if I'd call it a mistake when the president of a democratically elected president of a country incites a riot that leaves people dead over trying to overthrow their capital. I mean, my definition of mistake might be a bit different. I think, you know, fair enough, if I want to elect a joke candidate to run for the SU, that's great. What's the worst they can do? Get cheaper points? But if you're the leader of a country with nuclear weapons, you know, there are levels here. You see, in my opinion, the fault with democracy is just how easily manipulated people can be. We saw it in 2016 and the 2020 US presidential elections. And of course, don't get us started on Brexit, we all know it in Northern Ireland. Democracy is supposed to put the decision-making power into the hands of us, everyday citizens. It's supposed to be about freedom. It's supposed to be, in the words of the late Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But we live in an age where I would even begin to question the viability of democracy. With the rise of AI, you can't even tell if it was me or ChatGPT that wrote this exact speech. The advances in AI, and notably deepfake technology, should be a case for concern to absolutely anyone who does argue and support democracy. We do live in this new era of fake news, and with misinformation, democracy is just a lamb to the slaughter. But luckily, sorry, go ahead.
Do you not think misinformation could be better countered with better education?
I mean, I think that's a really great point, but I also realise that no one actually knows the ceiling of AI at the moment, and I believe that the former CEO of ChatGPT, OpenAI, the company that operates that system, was actually testifying, I believe, in the United States last year and actually raised concern that he's actually scared of what the future of it will be. I don't think any of us know how far AI can go, and we do know it's a threat to democracy. We saw what happened with Brexit, we saw what happened in the US elections, the targeting of people. I mean, there are ethics at play here that I don't think anyone, not even anyone with a PhD, could actually testify to. So I suppose I'm going to present to you a solution, an alternative, a viable alternative. And I know you guys might groan a little bit, but benevolent dictatorship and authoritarianism. Apologies, guys, I can't really pronounce my words here. I mean, aren't we all sick of the false promises? And in the case of a certain Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, the illegal election promises of, you know, deporting people to Rwanda? Dictatorships get a bad rap, and they should. I study history. We all know Hitler, we all know Mussolini, and we all know Stalin committed horrific war crimes. But there have been benevolent dictators. A previous speaker mentioned Yugoslavia, and now I'm not so sure how well versed we all are on Yugoslavia and everything that happened there, but Tito, who was the dictator at the time, was actually one of the people who held the region together, and it was only after that dictatorship fell that there was horrific things that happened. And in the case of the Srebrenica massacre, a lot of the blame can actually be placed at the UN, which, as we know, is meant to be one of the best democratic institutions that we have, because the peacekeeping failed.
On that point.
Go for it.
Ultimately, benevolent dictatorships, the strong man at the top is going to die, and it leaves a power vacuum. How do you guarantee that that's filled by another benevolent dictator?
Well, I think that's a great question, Max, and unfortunately, I'm not a benevolent dictator myself. But I'm sure you could be a great benevolent dictator if you want to take over from me. But look, this is the thing. Stability is really, really, really important. And typically, if I was a benevolent dictator, I'd have someone take over from me. So look, benevolent dictators don't need to spread the misinformation. They're in power. They don't need to form coalitions and water down their promises. They don't need to make stupid promises just for the sake of holding on to power. And I mean, we all know, democracy, it is a popularity contest. Again, look at the SU. What do they do? Come on, we're in the Literific. I suppose, to end on a brighter note, the question I have for you is this. What freedom is there when vulture-esque, ethically dubious actors like Cambridge Analytica, the Russian Federation, And the worst of the bunch, the United States of America, can influence democratic elections, oust governments, and undermine democracy. How viable is democracy itself? Voters do not have power in their hands anymore, but they have propaganda. And I mean, to cite a few examples, Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, Brazil in 1964. Those are just three of the democracies the United States have eradicated. And if you want any more, I'm sure you can ask Salvador Allende. Oh wait, you can't, they killed him.
Madam President. Anyway, Madam President and members of the House that would normally vote later tonight, I'm not here to tell you that democracy is working particularly well in this country. In fact, that would be an understatement. We've seen it time and time again, especially recently, that it has failed us. But that's not the motion tonight. The motion is that there is a viable alternative to democracy. Emphasis on the viable. And I don't think the proposition has quite proved that case. To oppose democracy would be to oppose autonomy, to oppose equality, and to oppose freedom of speech. It would be easy enough for me to stand up here and tell you how democracy is failing us, and how we should look for another system. But the prime advantage of democracy over any other system is at least you have the chance to voice your opinion, not just through voting, but through the right to protest, which is something that is fundamental to democracy. And we would not see a lot of things like civil rights, equal pay, legalized same-sex relationships and marriage without it. These are fundamental rights we enjoy as citizens that may not have been brought about without democracy. No, thank you. The reason that why democracy works better than an alternative system is because candidates who want to be elected have to make some sort of effort to represent the interests of the people to be voted into Parliament. I'm not saying this always goes well, which is why I did a bit of research and I found a very interesting candidate. Can I get the picture up, please? This, ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between, is Count Binface of Uxbridge. In a democratic election, he came 8 out of 18 candidates, beating UKIP for that area. He is an honorary man. He is a politician who will listen to you. And let me list some of the key items on his manifesto that I think truly reflect the interests of the general public, better than anyone in any alternative system could. Inflation of croissants. No croissant shall be sold for more than £1 in any shop. Piers Morgan to be banished to the Phantom Zone. And speakerphones to be banned on public transport, with offenders being punished by watching the animated vision movie of Cats, which features James Corden. Unfortunately, he didn't get elected, but in the words of Elton John, he is still standing. But imagine we lived in a complete monarchy. I can't imagine Prince Andrew caring all that much about the price of croissants. I think the only number he wants shrinking is the legal age of consent. In a democracy, we at least have the chance to get a say in what happens, and the people who are elected are people who are part, or, well, should be part, of our society.
On that point?
Yeah?
I don't think that the opposition has adequately proved why Oman isn't a viable alternative, especially considering that many democracies are prone to sort of subversive election rigging through companies like Cambridge Analytica, which has been involved in over 200 elections worldwide.
Well, I'd like to come to that with Norway. That is which is the most democratic country in the world, coincidentally also has one of the highest HDIs in the world, and in my opinion is a prime example of democracy working at its peak. The voter turnout in Norway is 77.2% compared to the 67.3% of the UK in the 2019 general election. This shows that citizens have faith in their system. I think the fact that a country can get democracy right should prove to us that democracy is a system that works and that we should not seek a viable alternative. Looking at Norway, there is a few things we could adapt to improve our democracy in our country. For example, more of an emphasis on collaborative policies between rival parties, which removes the us versus them and the desire to win, and also ensures that more people are heard. I also think by reducing the pay of MPs, we could reduce the power dynamic between the party and its constituents, like they've done in Norway, and perhaps restore some faith into democracy and politicians. Of course, yes, this is going to take some time, and you could argue we should look at a viable alternative. But what does this look like? Jonathan mentioned the efficiency of China, but also, China's not particularly great, is it? It's got censorship, high carbon emissions, and multiple human rights violations. It's all good and saying that a society can be efficient, but what does that mean when it comes to the general public? I think this is also an important system. No, thank you. An important point to bring up about democracy. It allows for such a broad range of ideas to be heard. It seems stupid bringing up Count Binface, but it's an actual point. Don't take Count Binface as my example, to be honest. Take the Voyeurism Act of 2019, also known as the Upskirting Law. This comes from a petition that was started by a campaigner, Gina Martin, who herself was a victim of upskirting. For those of you who don't know, it's when you take a picture underneath someone's skirt without permission. This petition was brought up in Parliament by a Liberal Democrat MP in private members' business, and was then backed by the Justice Minister. The bill was eventually passed, and this illustrates why democracy works. It's truly an issue from the people that in other systems I think would have just been ignored.
On that point?
No, thank you. And I don't think it would be a criminal offence today, had it not been for that position. In conclusion, normally I'd be asking you to vote with the opposition tonight, but there is no vote. However, democracy does expand to more than just the government, as it does in the Literific. You voted for council, you voted for prior opinion tonight, and you usually vote on speakerability. As flawed as democracy is, it can be the most viable option for us. Looking at some of the most effective societies in the world, they all happen to be democratic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, and I'd like to ask our judging panel to leave while we move on to questions. Bye. Don't take too long. We only have this room booked out till 9.
We're not going over.
So
everybody's waiting for their pocket now.
No, you're not. Go with next time.
She's got a pocket.
So how questions work is I will ask the question for the proposition, one person can respond, and then one person responds from the other side, and this goes on until they come back. So, does anyone have a question for the proposition? Kier.
So something that Ellie brought up.
It's Alan, by the way.
Alan, sorry, I really
Okay.
haven't. So sort of brought up towards the end of your speech about China, and that sort of leads on the question that I sort of had mainly for a while, and that's so you speak a lot about alternative systems to democracies, but we've seen that the countries with the best standard of living. You did bring up an example of one country, but most of the countries with the best standard of living, they are democracies. Like, doesn't that sort of show that by its nature, democracy is more viable because these democratic countries, it's better for their citizens to live like that?
Well, I appreciate the point is partially on like how authoritarian systems might not work, but the proposition is also pointed out, admittedly through the anarchist state, that there are also options that promote collective decision-making through policies that maximize effectiveness and improve quality of life. A lot of the policies and governmental systems that the opposition have promoted use the policy of collective decision-making, but an anarchist state as a viable alternative to democracy would take that and push that further to make that the primary way of making policy rather than just the occasional way, which would lead to possibly a greater quality of life as a result.
Opposition to respond?
Yeah, there's no word Norway. That's just me. I mean, yeah, I think Norway looks like a great country, and if they're managed democratically, and that is proven, they have one of, if not the highest human development index, showing that they are a country that's working properly, and their citizens actually look forward to voting. It's seen as a privilege when they turn 18. A lot of the younger citizens find that as a rite of passage. So yeah, I guess just It's kind of weird to reply.
No. Do we have a question for the opposition? Oh, Cormac?
So, sort of I guess in terms of democracy, I don't really think that both sides have really leveled up the whole debate between dictatorship and democracy so well, in the sense of benevolent dictatorship versus democracies which do bad things. But is it better to choose to be evil, aka vote for a bad parliament or whatever, or be forced to be good by a benevolent dictator? So choose to be evil or forced to be good?
I'll go with choose to be evil. There's context. When a democracy goes bad, like when it becomes evil, it normally eventually collapses. The same is for dictatorship, any sort of system. When it goes too far down one path, it collapses. With democracies, when they collapse, they usually once again result in democracies. It's able to fix itself because ultimately people continue inputting. It either collapses into some alternative form of governance as presented by them, which is going to be evil, or it remains democracy, which will cycle around and get better and better and tend towards something that's good for the citizens.
Proposition to respond?
I mean, we have to say choose to be good, obviously. That's our side of the debate. But just to respond to what Ryan said here about how sort of the collapse of democracy breeds democracy, could you just point out which North African / Middle Eastern states whose democracies have collapsed now have functioning democracies? Because I can't really think of any off the top of my head.
Oh, and do we have an abstaining question? James.
So there's two parts to this question. The first part is directed primarily to Jonathan and to Ella. You both cited examples of countries, so you had Oman and Norway, both of them got quite high GDPs, quite high populations. Is this anything to do with the fact that they're both oil-rich countries? The second part of my question is to everyone who spoke. Can you please give me an example of your specific ideal society that exists or has existed, and explain why that is the ideal state?
Proposition to respond first.
So, for Oman, obviously the capital which has a huge part to play in its prosperity, the same goes for Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, all these sort of states. But you've got to remember what the proposition is arguing here tonight is that a viable alternative exists. We're not saying that a viable alternative can, if a viable alternative can only exist in an oil-rich country, that doesn't disprove our argument. We're just saying that we believe a viable alternative exists at all. And as the other speakers have said, it doesn't require an oil-rich country, but sure, in the case of Oman, it definitely helps.
Yeah, opposition to respond first. Oh, do you want to go through every single Okay, Max, your turn.
Excellent. I had to go to another speech that I didn't get to go to. So a large
You said the Harris Commune, I will.
Oh, that doesn't even come up. So you're grand. So arguably, I'm speaking as a person who believes in the inherent good of human nature. So, and from my own personal experiences being on a council that worked specifically through collective decision making, if you put 20 people in a room, you'll actually come to a conclusion very fast that leads to an outcome that benefits everyone and was majority effective. I served on a young person charity for 2 years. All of our decisions were unanimous, and all of those decisions meant the charity grew to the largest extent it had ever had, and we now support several thousand young people with problems related to mental health and otherwise. So realistically, collective decision making does work. So taking that principle ahead, an anarchist state would basically make that its core ethos. So instead of just 20 people in a room, you'd have, say, 1,000 in a local community, or say 10,000. And you break that down, and while that sounds like a lot, you can break that up into smaller working groups. 1,000 easily becomes 50 groups of 20, and then each person nominates someone to report back on what the group's decision was, and as a result we come to a collective agreement on what's the best way to move forward. So realistically, a more democratic way of doing things without focusing on authoritarian somebody choosing your decisions for you. The argument I was explaining from the proposition is actually making the purest form of individuals taking the choice for themselves and coming to a decision that benefits the whole of the community.
Ellie?
So what are best?
Anywhere in history or any time or place, like the artist, give me why.
Well, I mean, if we're not on a vote tonight, then democracy.
No. Your argument.
My argument.
Yes, what you were stating. 7 minutes.
We're not.
You don't have to answer, by the way. You don't have one.
Well, I think the point of meritocracy hasn't come up a great deal in history, which is why it's going to be heavily theoretical. When democracy became
Angelica, oh right, I thought you were done.
I'll like both of the same, but like I really like King and like Luther. I mean, that's really, I just like
Okay,
it.
from Luther.
I just like being there with the that's dope about like contribute to like the worry.
And then do the opposition all have to say the best democracy they know?
They were closed for a long time.
Okay, Ryan, you first.
Really?
Yeah.
There's nothing to work its way in a circle. Okay.
No.
We need to finish with Ella's defense.
I don't know.
Ryan,
Democracy is rather shit.
Everything
I said is worse.
Gavel. You're getting fined for it, by the way.
Grand, yeah.
Okay.
The correct answer is free. 1872 Britain is the ideal system.
Did you get a book due to your lovely Protestant ancestors?
Wait, Misha, do you have an answer or you don't need to answer if you
My,
don't want to?
my favourite kind of democracy.
Yeah.
I think, with the exception of the fact that it was only men over 20 who weren't slaves, I do quite like Athenian direct democracy. And I did go all the way to Athens just to see the little voting machines where they put the balls in which like corresponded to the citizens in Athens. And they like did it like a bit like a bingo. And then that person's basically like Prime Minister for the day. And I think we should bring that back.
Jack, what's your favourite type of democracy?
1983.
Oh my god.
The single general election result happened. When the people elected Margaret Thatcher, reduction of the size against every
So we have the new Edward Carson quote, but it's Margaret Thatcher.
No, well, she is a wonderful woman.
Ella, what is your favourite type of democracy?
Am I getting lost?
No.
I think I'll win this time. I genuinely think. Amazing candidate. I love him.
Real democracy.
Okay. Do we have another question for the proposition? Harry?
I have a specific question for Doctor Who. The reason being, you keep protecting the Earth from the Daleks and Cybermen. Why do you keep doing this if you don't actually believe in a democracy?
Well, actually, I think you'll find, sir, through my years of travel through times, I have come to believe that collectively, humanity is an inherent good. They try to help each other out wherever they can. They're ingenious in their decision making. They come to inventive conclusions that even I would never have thought of. That's why I bring companions along me with my travels. And occasionally, to get a greater direct number of ideas, I swap them out occasionally. I'm going back to a few on the 26th of November to really understand. Yeah, tune in, guys. It's going to be really good fun.
It's a photo of David Tennant, just hold
Oh, okay.
Just keep it on your head.
Yeah, great. This is what we're doing now. This is what this prestigious society has come down to, hasn't it?
My phone crashed.
Tennant above my head.
Opposition. Oh wait, no.
Yeah, look, if you want my justification, read Humankind by Rupert Bregman. It's honestly a very fascinating read on why I believe that humanity is an inherent good.
Opposition to respond to Doctor Who?
If you're saying that humanity is an inherent good and everything, then I'm just going to hark back to my point that democracy arises from the human condition and human suffrage, in that it's the only system which has consistently avoided slavery. It doesn't guarantee all freedoms, but it does guarantee that you're never going to be wholly subject to the will of another. Otherwise, it's not democracy. It may describe itself as democracy, but it's not. If that's why you go and protect things. I know nothing about Doctor Who. That's why democracy is inherently good. If you love the people because people are inherently good, you have to love what loves the people. Democracy loves the people.
Do we have a question for the opposition?
Please so.
You at the back, please. Well, state your name for the minutes.
Moss. What is the opposition's general opinion on the attempts of decentralized government in places such as the Zapatistas in Mexico or democratic compatibilism in Rojava?
Is this for the opposition or proposition, sorry?
Opposition.
Opposition, okay. Yeah. Who wants to respond?
When you're talking about decentralized government in Mexico, I'm assuming you're just talking about how the federal authority had very, very little authority over what the states and territories were doing. In that case, I don't have a clue. Sorry.
The proposition want to respond to
Does anyone want to respond to this other than me getting into that, but I think cool. Well, I would say that it is an inherent good. I mean, we've seen systems that have decentralized government and giving power to people directly rather than through representative democracy. As much as the opposition likes to say, oh, it's the power to the people, it's not inherently. Modern democracy as a concept is directly rooted in an electoral system. Ask any politician, and that will be their objective answer. So I believe that a decentralized system such as that is really good. I mean, even from the example of allocating budget, cities such as like Porto Alegre in Colombia or some experiments in Brazil have yielded very positive results. So if we shift away from existing democratic systems towards the positive, viable alternative that I discussed, then yes, I believe that's a very good thing that we should strive towards.
Does your model work about like trying to keep people in a room?
Yes, I actually described that in detail, James. My friend Shoots might have tuned out for that.
I did.
Do we have another abstaining question? Here.
Right, so one thing that I'm a bit unclear on is that, so proposition has sort of been a bit all over the place with sort of ideas like authoritarianism, anarchism, and the opposition has been a bit more consistent. One thing that I'm mainly concerned about is sort of been talking about like benefits in economy, not talk about like actual real society. Like for example, under your ideal system, how would you best banish James Corden to the shadow realm?
Opposition to respond first?
I'm like,
You can discuss this a bit when you come up as a group. Opposition respond first.
How would we best banish?
Think Alan?
Yeah.
Specifically to the shadow realm, that's important.
Can it just be Wales?
That is the shadow realm, correct.
Wales would be too nice for James Corden, even though we spent a large time filming Gavin's face for that. I think it would be too nice of a place to put James Corden there. And personally, as a Welsh person, I would not want to see him about Cardiff Town. How we banish James Corden to the shadow realm? Honestly, I'm a 19-year-old politics student, and I don't think I'm qualified to give you the answer on that.
Well, we are.
Proposition to respond.
The meritocracy. As soon as it happens, it'll just spontaneously combust.
It's a pretty good answer, actually. Do we have another question for the proposition? No.
Yeah, I'm just
Laszlo too.
Yo, just a bit curious. It's like in terms of. Man, I was doing cocaine with that man before just out of curiosity, when you talk about anarchism, I mean, I'm assuming it's a variation of Proudhon, Bakunin, Kropotkin, Buchin, all of which are democratic. The system which you described as democratic confederalism, by definition, is democratic. Sorry, it's just been winding me up the entire evening. Also, in terms of meritocracy, how do you decide who has the most merit? Outside of, you've got two options, either the guy above you, who is, I guess, being paid by the same system, either that's based on profit or divine right of kings or whatever, or it's done democratically. So I'm curious as to what benefits or the viable alternatives you're suggesting, and what's the difference between what you're suggesting to democracy and what the difference you're suggesting to democracy is?
It's two questions. Okay, Ella, do you want to go first? Or about meritocracy?
Yeah, I mean, that is a problem to be worked through. I think if you've got a competitive system of, for the election of politicians, then that can work through. Also, if you put people through a program of, like, Chinese is, like, I'm not idealising the system of government, but their election of officials is pretty effective. Like, they send people off like a country, get them to do, like, work experience. And then whoever works the best in, it's professional governance, and whoever is the highest achieving through that process.
And the democratic bit of the question.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry.
I actually was expecting somebody to know actual anarchist philosophy. But what I what I would say is, and I'm definitely not spoiling the time and hoping that the judges come in, so I don't have to. Oh, thank God.
Still talking.
Yeah, I know that's satirical. But realistically, a viable alternative to a democratic state does not have to remove itself from all democratic principles. It just has to evolve it into a new form. We're not saying get rid of the ability for people to have a say because that's an inherent principle of democracy because democratus, but then all of a sudden we're saying all these like centuries-old Greek people who nobody really understands as practical alternative. I haven't read that much Greek stuff, forgive me. But what I am the reason why I believe it's an inherent difference to democracy is what I discussed in my speech. A lot of the democratic institutions as they currently exist and what all viable democratic states as the opposition have brought up are inherently centered around state institutions that are divisive, that promote division, and as a result limit the amount of people that can enter those fields. The anarchist alternative, while adhering to some of those principles inherent within a democratic state, shifts away from that system of institutionalization and instead going down to brass tacks and pretty much getting people in a room going, right, this is a problem. What do you want to get out of this? What do you want to solve in this? And how to do that. And I believe that's an inherently different system to how a democratic state would operate.
Opposition to respond to
Wait,
both meritocracy and the
You need to add the max. Okay, you can laugh. No, you do first, because.
I still want to think about what we can say.
Think on your feet.
Okay, well, I'm going to use a lovely little personal anecdote. When I was 12 years old, I created a Quora account. And I don't know if anyone else has ever been on Quora, but it's a terrible, terrible place. And I decided to answer a question which was asking about the political leanings of Gen Z, which was a terrible mistake, and I became embedded in this weird community online. But I wrote that I was a socialist, liberal, politically centrist human being, which are just buzzword central made up by a 12-year-old. When you talk about meritocracy, that's something I said when I was 12 years old that I thought was great, mostly because Elon Musk said it. He said he wants that for a society on Mars. But the thing is, you can't actually just say that and not propose how to do it. In fairness, this time you did sort of say, yes, maybe let's have some sort of program to put people through like China does. Who designs that program? Either you have to have a democracy to design that program, in which case you have a democracy, and democracy is doing good things, or you have to have a dictatorship. And a dictatorship is not going to usually move to something that is better for the people. It's just a system which doesn't make sense. If you can propose a way it works, that's great. And then I'm going to bring you back to the POI I gave during my speech. Who is the most qualified person to be Prime Minister? I'm not asking of the current MPs. I'm asking in general, because you have to find a way to find that person. I'll second that.
Jack Steele, do you want to...
I think your anarchist philosophy rests on the fallacy that you do not believe that nothing particularly that people are bad can be bad, that you seem to ignore that we are imperfect people in a world with sin problems and issues. And the fact is, even Milton Friedman, the chief free market economist, concedes in his book that the free market is like a game and the government has to serve as an umpire in that game because you need some form of regulation. Friedman would argue for very small regulation, but you still need some form of state, but particularly in my opinion a small one. I would also just add that institutions of state, I mean this is your prerogative, I'm certainly not advocating that you return the rule of law and the justice system, but that seems to be the argument presented. I think that would be quite obscene, given the dates that I listened to of instances of sheer tyranny.
I've never been so happy to see all
Parliamentary freedom of democracy, and because of those things, they were done to use it.
Okay, Alkin, is it you announcing?
Yeah.
Okay, come on up. We'll get the...
So I want to say this was an exceptionally tough decision, and we debated this a lot, and we looked through a lot of different speeches. We talked about every single speech in great detail, and we have to say one of the things that we all agreed on the way back, and particularly me who's not been in the society in a long time, it is great to see the art of rhetoric and debate is still alive and well across QUB, and the speeches were phenomenal. We have come to a conclusion though that the winner of this year's Godkin for the session? 175th session is Ella Griffiths.
You don't have to read that, that's not...
Oh, I think by the shock of the look on my face, I was not expecting that. I thought I completely tanked that, so, yeah. I like that my boyfriend who listens to every single one of my speeches, he's been through every single rendition of that. I've ran every single joke past him. Yeah, and thank you for the Literific for welcoming me. Yeah, thank you very much. I
really Next week's debate is This House Regrets the Industrial Revolution. It's not there on the screen. And we will be going to the post house now, so if someone follows someone up there, and everyone comes to the front for a picture as well. Not everyone, just speakers.